So many of us are trapped in what I like to call the if then when delusion. We are tying our happiness to things that we think we might achieve in the future, things that we want. And these might be physical things, it might be a car, it might be a lot of money, it might even be a partner, or it might be wanting to achieve a particular status in some way, or a job of some sort, and feeling as though once we achieve this, then we'll be happy. So in my personal life, I kind of always assumed that things would get better the older that I got, and that once I achieved the things that I kind of set out to achieve, then I would be happy, and this mentality followed me everywhere. It followed me from high school, when I went to university, and when I finally became a doctor and achieved something that I thought that I'd wanted for a very long time. I was expecting that then I would be happier. But in reality, as I'm sure many of you already know, it doesn't work that way. Because anytime I achieved any of these things that I'd set out to achieve, I would often be maybe happy for a few moments or happy for a short period of time, but eventually that satisfaction would fade, and I would be left with this kind of emptiness and almost disappointed that what I had tried hadn't made me any happier. And I think there's a really good analogy of this in that is a legend that arose among the First Nations people of North America. You may have heard of the Wendigo. It's this awful creature with a bloodthirsty, cannibalistic creature that goes around killing and eating everything. But despite how much it eats, it's still so thin and emaciated, and that hunger never goes. And to me, that is a lot like what desires are like in our life, or what these kind of if then when achievements that we are kind of staking our happiness on. That's how it really works. When we achieve this, it doesn't satiate that hunger. It doesn't give us the fulfillment we're longing for. It just leaves us with a sense of emptiness. So then how do we become truly happy if being happy is not the result of material things or things that we can achieve? Well, for something to be true happiness and true fulfillment, first of all, it's got to be something that lasts, but it's also got to be something that we can access even in our darkest moments, and something that isn't dependent on anything outside of us. It's got to be a place that we can go when everything's going wrong for us, but also a place that we can be when everything's going right. Now, the Buddha, who lived around 2,600 years ago, was an incredibly smart man who had everything. He was a prince, he lived in absolute luxury, and he had everything that a man at the time could ever dream of. He had money, power, he had a future, he could have been king of the nation that he was living in, and he had a wife and family even. But after exhausting all these kind of material, sensual pleasures, and it's said that actually after a night of basically drinking and debauchery, he woke up and looked out around the room, and I'm sure many of us been there on a bit of a hangover, and thought, is this really it? Is this really making me happy? And he realized that no matter what he did, no matter what he achieved, he was still going to be subject to illness, old age, and death, and suffering in all its many forms. That whatever you achieve in your materially, you're still going to be subject to these facts of life that none of us can get away from. So after a great journey and many years, Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha, made an incredible discovery. He came up with something called that you may have heard of as the Four Noble Truths. And in brief, these are: number one, that there is suffering. Suffering is a fact of life. As human beings, we all suffer at some point in our lives, and it's not something that we can escape from. We can't live in a way where everything goes our way 100% of the time. But the Buddha's key insight, the second noble truth, was that the majority of our suffering comes from our desires and our attachments. It's like we are not happy with the way things are, and we believe that if things were to be different, then we would be happy. And this just simply isn't true. And this was the Buddha's key insight, was that whatever we achieve and whatever desires we might fulfill, if we are tying our happiness to future things that aren't accessible now, that are never really going to give us lasting fulfillment, then we are doomed to suffer forever. The third noble truth was that there is an end to this suffering and that there is a way out. And the fourth noble truth was the Buddha's prescription of how to go about doing this, and that's referred to as the Noble Eightfold Path. And if you're interested, you can by all means look into that yourself. And it's basically just general guidelines about how to live your life and how to live in a state of happiness and fulfillment. So that might seem a bit complicated, but the Buddha was very clear that these truths are something that you have to realize in your own life. It's not something that anybody can tell you. Everything the Buddha ever taught, he said, don't take my word from it. Go and examine your own consciousness and see if these things are true. Of course, this isn't always the easiest thing to do. I mean, it took the Buddha weeks of constant meditation sitting under the Bodhi tree to achieve this. So I didn't say it was easy, but there are some simple tips that we can derive from this teaching to bring a little bit of happiness into our daily lives. Tip number 1, put the baseball bat down. And that means stop beating yourself up. If things haven't gone the way that you wanted them to go, you're not going to get anywhere by criticizing yourself and dwelling on what's happened and how things haven't gone the way you wanted them to. You can't change you're not in control of everything that happens in the world. And that means that things aren't always going to go your way. So if you can learn to detach yourself from the circumstances of what's going on around you, then you can live a much happier life. The way that the Buddha presented this in a different teaching was talking about 2 arrows. So you imagine that something doesn't go well in your life. For example, you're driving along and you crash your car. And let's hope that you're okay. Now, the first arrow hitting you is the car having crashed. But when you dwell on what's happened, and when you think about all the ways that things could have been different, and all the ways that you've been so very unfortunate in what's happened to you, it's almost like you're firing a second arrow into yourself. And that second arrow is where we get the majority of our suffering from. So whilst we may not be able to control the circumstances of what's happening in our life, we can begin to control our responses to it. And that's this second arrow. So my second tip is to live in the present. And no, this doesn't mean getting pissed at the weekends. Because I'm sure we've all been there, in the club at 4 a.m, dancing along to your favourite tune, thinking, this is the life, I want to do this forever. And sometimes we might get a glimpse of being in the now in those moments. But the truth is that when we're drinking or getting high or whatever it is, we're really trying to escape from our mind. We're not trying to live in the present. We're trying to live out of the present, if at all possible. We're trying to escape the torment and suffering that is in our own minds, or our discontentment with the way things are. Living in the present is the key to living a happier life. Because if you're constantly thinking about the future, or maybe things that have happened in the past, then you're never truly going to be happy, because you can't access the future and you can't access the past in this moment. All you ever have is now. And that doesn't matter if you're 10 years old, 30 years old, or 100 years old. All you ever have is this moment. And in that way, it kind of means that this moment is outside of time. Number 3, clear some space. If you already think you know how to be happy, and you already think you know everything that you ever want and the way that you're going to get there, then it's going to be really difficult for you to accept certain truths into your life. And I'm not speaking about this as somebody who's completely free from my suffering and free from my ego. In fact, it's got a very firm grip on me. But I'm working on it just like everybody else. And these are things that have been very, very helpful to me. There's a story that's told within Buddhist circles as well about a young monk who goes to visit a spiritual master to learn more about Buddhism and to learn how to be happy. And the first thing the master does is offer him a cup of tea. So the student sits down and says, yeah, that would be great. He holds his cup out and the master starts pouring and pouring and pouring. And the tea starts to fill up the cup more and more and more. But eventually the tea starts to overflow, but the master keeps going. And eventually the student says, hey, what are you doing? You already filled up the tea, it's going everywhere. And the master says, this is like your mind. If your mind is already full, how is there anything that I can teach you? So, number 4, and this is the practical advice about how you can bring happiness into your life, and that is meditation. Now, meditation might sound like a bit of a woolly concept to many of you, or it might sound like something that's a bit foreign, but in fact, it's something that is inherent to all of us. Meditation is truly the best way to experience the truth. And this is what the Buddha was saying about you've got to find this out for yourself. This isn't something that somebody can tell you, okay? You might be able to write all the things down that somebody else has said and think that you're going to live a happier life because of it. But in reality, you need to experience these truths for yourself. Otherwise, they won't do anything for you. If you can sit in meditation and observe the thoughts in your mind, you'll realize the truth that you're not your desires, you're not your thoughts, you're not your feelings. In fact, you are the being that is observing those thoughts and feelings. And not just thoughts and feelings, but the circumstances and situations that arise in the world around you, things that happen to you in your life. These aren't part of who you are, it's simply things that are happening. And like anything, it comes and goes. And once you realize this, suddenly the heavy weight that you've been dragging around like a ball and chain, your ego, starts to get lighter and lighter and lighter. Meditating a little bit every day helps you to stay grounded in the present moment. It helps you to stay in that state of peace and loving awareness. And your fulfillment is not going to be bound to external things that you can't access, perhaps in the past or in the future. And it's actually really easy to do. You don't need anything to do it apart from yourself. The easiest way is to just close your eyes, sit still, and bring your attention to your breath. Then just watch the thoughts go by, like driftwood on a river. And anytime you find yourself getting lost in the water, clinging to a log, just gently pull yourself back out to the side of the river. Bring yourself back to your anchor, which is the breath, and just watch those feelings and thoughts go by. And the more you do this, the more you'll identify the more you do this, the less you will identify with the thoughts and feelings that make up the content of your consciousness. If you can have the strength and the determination to let all those things go, to let the thoughts and feelings and emotions just wash over you and go past, and realize that they are not who you are, you'll discover something much, much more profound, that within you there is an infinite ocean of peace and loving awareness just waiting for you to dive in. And a really lovely quote that I think sums this all up very well and shows that this is a universal truth is from somebody that you've also probably heard of, Jesus Christ. And in Luke chapter 17, verse 20 of the Bible, when asked by the Pharisees, how are we going to recognize the kingdom of God? How will we see the kingdom of God? Jesus responds and says that we will not recognize the coming of the kingdom of God with visible signs. And he says, nor will they say, look, it's here, or look, it's there. For indeed, the kingdom of God is within you.